Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.
Hoop ballers. Let's talk about your balls. Yep, your balls and the area around them. Let's talk about manscaped.com. Go there and use promo code hoopball20, HOOPBALL20. Use the promo code and go check out all the tools they have of trimming the hedges and taking care of your lawn, like the Lawnmower 3.0 with a built-in LED light to help you get into those dark dye crevices on the inner parts. Also, the Gooch. It is hard to get to the Gooch if you can't see it. So use the LED light with the anti-tugless technology on the razor, full long battery life. Then check out the Weed Whacker. Bring that out of the shed. Use it on your shrubs. Cut down what you need, down to bare minimum if you need to. It's got a nice anti-tugless technology just like the Lawnmower 3.0. It's also got a lithium battery. And best news of all, these things are waterproof. So that way you can do it in the shower and take care of business in the cleanest way possible. Hoopball20 is the promo code that's going to get you free shipping as well as 20% off. I recommend using it. I recommend getting the complete care kit with your free shipping and your 20% off. Spend a little extra, get a lot more. There's a good care kit there for us gentlemen: face scrub, shampoo, ball treatment, and the area that surrounds our balls. I believe there's even a pair of underwear in there for our balls. So yeah, that's going to conclude the talk about our balls. Now let's talk about bets. MyBookie.ag is where all the hoop ballers take care of their winnings and where we place all of our wagers that we post in our article in the Wager Pass, as well as our free plays and our Discord chats. Yes, MyBookie.ag. Use promo code HOOPBALL, HOOPBALL. Let them know that we sent you. Hell, specifically type in my name. I want them to know. But most importantly, you got to let them know what podcast that is. And it is Today in Sports Betting. You let them know that we sent you, and then we as a family get to grow. And then we get to set you up to reap more benefits. And that is what's important to us, because we are here to help you win money. And that is why we recommend MyBookie. Their slogan is bet, win, get paid. And it's quite simply that easy. Use Bitcoin to get going. That's a high recommendation of VM Center at Vince Miracle, our guy. It's a recommendation of me. It's so easy. Dan Besbris, the Podfather, Aaron Brewski, the Godfather, they get in there, they get going with Bitcoin, they get their money in and out, and it's easy peasy. Hoopball's the promo code. Use that. Let them know that we sent you. MyBookie.ag. Bet, win, get paid. Now, as a podcast, we have your balls and your bets covered. And without further ado, we have Today in Sports Betting.
The following is a Hoop Ball presentation.
Hoop Ballers! Welcome back to another episode and another edition of Today in Sports Betting. I am your host, Devin Ellington, or at DALE007 on Twitter. Don't forget to go check out the rest of the guys, the crew over on Hoop Ball Gaming. at Hoopball Gaming on Twitter. Hoop-ball.com is where you're going to find all the brand new member loyalty packages that we put together. I don't like to harp on the premium stuff, which my boss probably wouldn't like to hear with the whole sales side and all that good stuff. But Hoop-ball.com has a lot more free content to offer you than we do that we try to charge you for. So there's that. And I'm not a podcast host that sits there and just talks about the premium content over and over and throughout the duration of the show. Go to hoop-ball.com, check out some of the free stuff, look at the information that we provide you. Let that decide if you want to come and join the Hoopball family in a larger sense. So the Discord servers are the hangout spots that I love to be in. I love the followers and the folks that we got in there. The MLB channel is always fun. We got lots of college football stuff coming up. So with that being said, I'm going to segue into who we're going to have on the show today. And it's a show that I'm thoroughly excited for. I love my small conference schools, and this gentleman sees a lot of it. He's very savvy and has some great information and nuggets to dish today. This is an interesting team we're going to be talking about today that is going under the radar, in my opinion. We're going to be talking the FIU Panthers. That's right. Florida International Panthers playing out of Ricardo Silva Stadium. I had to go out and find me a good host. I was listening to the podcast that I love to listen to for college football prep. Heard Eric on the show with Colby Dant and the College Football Experience. So without further ado, today's guest, we're going to have the co-managing editor of Underdog Dynasty, FIU beat writer, and the Conference USA podcast host for SB Nation. Also a part of the Football Writers Association of America, if I might add. Located in Tampa and Southern Florida, Tampa, Miami, in that area, Eric Henry. Eric, I am stoked for this one, boss. How are you doing, bud? Welcome on.
Man, first off, Devin, appreciate you having me on. And I don't know if I'm necessarily worthy of that intro, but I will take it. I certainly will not turn it down. But yeah, man, I know for the listeners at home, I'll kind of give you a peek behind the curtain. It's been a bit of what would you want to call it, Devin? You know, it's kind of playing internet tag, Twitter tag. We can't call it phone tag, but we've definitely been kind of working with each other, to make our schedules work for this. And I'm just glad we could carve out some time here on this beautiful Saturday afternoon to talk a little FIU football, a little Conference USA football.
Absolutely. It was a little hodgepodge of a demented game of like freeze tag, internet tag, and all the associated tags. That's for dang sure. But yes,
no doubt about that.
FIU football will be the theme today, and I'm looking forward to it, man. What I'm also looking forward to, and this is selfish of me, but really, really, I'm familiar with your work. Like I told you off air, and what I'll probably say a couple more times on air. You know, the guests that I have come on the show, it's because A, I respect y'all. B, I really appreciate the content that's being put out by y'all, and C, I just want to say that I've talked to you. So, the fact that you were able to come on the show, I'm appreciative of. And, you know, I'm just really looking forward to hearing more about yourself. So for the listeners, you know, if I might have missed something or I didn't dump the whole can of beans out, you know, for the listeners, just tell us a little bit about your background, man. How'd you get you're a UCF grad, Northwestern U grad, you know, you do the Shula Bowl Pod and all that good stuff. I mean, you're a busy guy, so give us some insight.
For the ones who get going when the going gets tough, and the ones who know we're tougher together. For the Pathfinders breaking new ground, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as fast access to experts and 24/7 customer support. Because we know you have people depending on you, so you can always depend on us. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Wow. Well, being on this side of the realm, it's always a little bit embarrassing to talk about yourself. So first of all, just say again, I appreciate the compliment in terms of being a fan of the coverage, you know, Underdog Dynasty, SB Nation. Underdog Dynasty, for those of you who may not be familiar with our site, it is SB Nation's home for Group of Five football coverage. So we primarily cover the American Conference, the Sun Belt, Conference USA, Independence, FCS. Given the news of kind of the Big 12 over the past few days, who knows, what schools may or may not be in those conferences coming up in the next few years. But
don't get me started, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. Same here. But no, that's where you can primarily find my work. And I think you pretty much covered it. I'm a UCF grad. Got my undergraduate degree from UCF, and then also Northwestern as well in terms of my background there. And I've been writing. Let's see, what is this? My fifth year with Underdog Dynasty SB Nation. I've done a little bit of broadcast work. I've been around the horn a little bit. Yeah. So we're not trained to talk about ourselves, but no, I've been covering FIU and Conference USA for 5 years, and it's definitely been a labor of love as someone who attended at the time. I graduated UCF 2015. They've been an American. We'll see. When I got to UCF, they actually were Conference USA. Final 2 years were in conference. My first 2 years at UCF, it was the final 2 years of Conference USA, and that affiliation then transferred over to the American Conference. So I have been a keen observer of the quote unquote Group of Five conferences for a while now, and it's always been fun to kind of spotlight those schools. And I have the pleasure to cover a program that's really kind of had some success over the past few years with Butch Davis. Obviously, the last 2 years weren't the type of years that they would have wanted, but overall, it's been fun. I would say my passion is with the Group of Five schools. Not saying that I wouldn't love the opportunity down the road to cover, a Michigan or Alabama or wherever the journey takes me, but I do enjoy covering the Group of Five schools. And honestly, Devin, if I will say this, I won't try to toot my own horn, but I'll say in terms of the athletes at this level, for the most part, they're very appreciative of the coverage. This is the way I like to describe it. It is, imagine if you're a college athlete and you play your game there at, let's say you play a noon game, right? You play, you're back in your dorm or your apartment by 5, 6 o'clock. And, you may have scored a couple touchdowns and you check out the roll of highlights and you don't even see a mention of your game, right? All you see is the lead up for the Alabama game or the Michigan game or the Oklahoma game. And that could be demoralizing for some of these kids. So I will say the one thing that I take away from it is at this level of college football, the kids are very appreciative of the coverage and they have great stories to tell as well. So it's been a pleasure to tell those stories over the past 5 years.
Yeah, there are so many just phenomenal athletes within these, like you said, and I don't mean it in a disrespectful way at all when I say smaller conference or small school. Group of Five, I've always had it, like you said, a keen interest. I always remember rooting for the Boise States, in 2007, and then the Northern Illinois against, I think it was Florida State or Notre Dame that they ran into in their New Year's Six Bowl a few years back, about 2013. But yeah, just to piggyback your point, I love these kinds of schools, and it's awesome to see a mirroring passion come from you and your work. And without further ado, man, how about we tear into some of this Panthers football team and start digging in some nitty gritty stuff here, boss?
Yeah, man, let's get into it.
Awesome. So Butch Davis is the coach, and he's going on year 5 now. He's hit his 15th year overall as a coach. And for those of you unfamiliar, Butch Davis had some run as a coach in the NFL. He coached other big programs in college. He's got 9 offensive returning starters and 9 defensive returning starters. And look, they went 0-5 last year in a weird COVID year. I feel that last year could definitely be chalked up as like a blip or like a fluke. Last year was just so odd for so many teams. And I think this year is a good track year for Butch Davis. Got some good transfers in, got a dynamic player in Devonta Price, the senior running back. So what group are you most excited for coming into this season?
Sure. Well, first, let me start in terms of last year and talk about the COVID challenges. And for those of your listeners who may not be familiar with FIU in terms of last year that you mentioned, they went 0-5, a winless year. They played the fewest amount of games of any team in Conference USA.
Yes.
It's between them and Charlotte. And it felt like it's funny. We just came off of Conference USA Media Days, and Coach Healy up there at Charlotte played 6 games, and he spoke about how It just was from week to week, day to day. You can't even focus on practice and trying to prep your team for a game because you're so focused on what's the COVID situation? Are we going to play? And it's kind of, it's really difficult to prep a team to play a football game when you're spending half of the week wondering what the travel situation is going to be, how many players you're going to have. Can you even install a game plan with this group of tight ends or this group of linemen or this group of linebackers, not knowing who or who isn't going to be eligible to play? And FIU was certainly affected by that. So I'll kind of give you a quick story here before I jump into, your question in terms of groups being excited about. The two things can really kind of sum up the FIU football season. The first story I'll give is opening week against Liberty. They didn't have their first practice in pads until 11 days before that game. And when you talk about in terms of just the overall availability of bodies, 8 days before that game, they had defensive linemen practicing at offensive linemen just so they could get a full 5-on-5 scrimmage. So, 5-on-5 scrimmage. I'm thinking basketball. Sorry about that. Well, I just got off the Olympics. I apologize.
Yeah.
They can get, sorry, I'm rooting for Team USA here. So they can get a full 11-on-11 scrimmage. That's not a recipe for success. And then you couple that with the fact that Liberty team was really good last year. For those of you who I'm assuming do know that, but for those of you who don't, they had a hell of a year last year. And FIU pushed them to within 2 points. So this goes to show you, of any game that was probably most indicative of what FIU team you might get in 2021, it's that Liberty game. Because after that, Devin, here's the second story I'll transition to give you. The fourth game of the year, they play FAU. It's the rivalry game. It's a Shula Bowl game. They have it at home. The configuration of the stadium at FIU due to COVID, of course, they had the seating restrictions. So, fans were spread out and whatnot. And students, they had the student section kind of cornered off, right? They didn't want the student population intermingling with general population and whatnot. So that student section was actually reserved for players who weren't playing because they didn't want them down the field if, it was a COVID situation or whatnot. It got to a point, Devin, when you looked in that student section, I counted one by one by one. There were 17 guys who weren't in uniform for that FAU game just based on injuries alone. So that goes to show you how banged up they were, in addition to players who weren't eligible because of COVID. So if you want to take anything away from last year, it's that they just didn't have enough healthy bodies by the time they got to the fifth and final game, which was Western Kentucky. Yeah. So I'll just, for those of you listening, in terms of wondering what to make of their 2020, in terms of 2021, and you ask me what groups am I excited about, you got to start with Devontae Price, right? I mean, Devontae truly was one of the few bright spots in what was a otherwise abysmal year. He rushed for an average of 116.2 yards per game. And the reason I start with that number instead of his overall yards that he had, I believe that number was 581, if memory serves me correct. FIU, again, only played 5 games. So if Devontae is able to keep that average for the entire year, and that was second in Conference USA behind Sincere McCormick's 130 per game, Devontae Price would have rushed for almost 1,500 yards. The exact number was 1,494 that he would have rushed for had FIU played an entire 12-game season. And when I spoke to Devontae for Conference USA Media Days, he truly believes that he's the best running back in Conference USA. Again, for your listeners who may not be familiar, you're talking about a conference that has Sincere McCormick, who was second in the nation in rushing last year, again, if memory serves me correct. Mm-hmm. So Devontae is truly an exciting player. I mean, he has all of the tools that you'd look for in the vision, breakaway speed, good receiver out of the backfield. I mean, Devin, you can go back to the 2019 year. And I remember when FIU opened the year against Tulane, one of Tulane's assistant coaches told me post-game that, we were surprised we didn't see more Price because we thought he was the team's best back. And that was including a roster that had guys like Anthony Jones and Napoleon Maxwell, both of whom spent time in NFL camps. That just goes to show you, how highly regarded Devontae is. Once you get out of the receiver room, I think you got to kind of take a look at the secondary. I mean, FIU's secondary has been good for the past, really since Butch Davis got there in 2017. Everything starts with the Dames twins, Richard and Rashard Dames, a pair of twins out of Miami. They've really been just a constant back there in the secondary since 2018. If you're looking at Conference USA defensive backs, I mean, Richard's probably in your top 5 to 7 safeties, and Rashard's probably in your top 6 to 8, 6 to 10 cornerbacks. So you start with those guys. Dorian Hall is a 6'5", 210-pound safety. So first off, great size. really rangy safety. In the past 3 years, Pro Football Focus has had Dorian Hall as one of their top-rated safeties in Conference USA. Josh Turner, the Iowa transfer. They have Henry Gray, a former four-star recruit, had signed with Nebraska, but then decided to come home. So, I mean, they're just littered with talent in the secondary. And I'll give you one more group to be excited about, and that's the offensive line. They are somewhat inexperienced. They're kind of shuffling some guys in with the graduations of, or I should say graduation of Shane Magoo, and then D'Anthony Demery chose to not take advantage of the additional year that was provided by the NCAA. But O-line coach Joel Rodriguez is really excited about the guys he has there. They got Dante Keys, who was with the program last year from North Carolina A&T, and he was considered a pro prospect, which is the reason he made the jump from the FCS level to the FBS level. Of course, the 5-game season didn't help him in that sense, so he's back for another go-around. You look at Lindell Hudson on the right side, really one of the most, I would say, from the time he entered college, and he's considered a redshirt sophomore again because of the NCAA rules. You know, you get the additional year. So last year was kind of a mulligan. So in football years, he would be a redshirt junior. But from the time he got to FIU to now, just in terms of his improvement, he's got all the physical tools that, you know, again, Coach Rodriguez said in terms of Lindell, he can be as good as he wants to be. And I think that's certainly a testament to, you know, kind of his potential. So that offensive line really has the opportunity to spring holes for Price and the other backs there. And again, you know, there is reason to be optimistic around this 22-1 FIU football team, but it's going to come down to a group I did not talk about, and that's the quarterbacks.
Yeah, I was looking over the quarterback room, and I'm sure you've heard this joke a million times, but Max Bortenschlager, like his last name just sounds like you would take a shot of it, you know? Goldenschlager, Bortenschlager, something like that. But this, I love. Okay, so the offensive line, I'm glad you touched on that, because that group was the most damaged group last year due to COVID and the injuries that we alluded to, or that you alluded to. And the coaches, I saw some interesting stuff in the coaches, but we can talk them after the slingers. Let's talk about this quarterback group. What dynamic of it has you so excited? Is it the pairing with the running back group and the experience, or, you know, just the overall potential?
Well, and to be clear, I'm not necessarily saying that I am excited. That's not to say that I'm down on the quarterbacks either,
sure,
but it's very much going to be a wait and see. You know, the groups that I gave you, I think there is more, you've seen more evidence of them, either whether it was Devontae having the success that he had in 2020, the longstanding success of the secondary, or the fact that the offensive line really from top to bottom, this has a chance to be one of the better groups, in my opinion, in Conference USA. The quarterbacks are a wait and see, right? And you talk about Max, and yeah, I've absolutely heard that line about his last name. Believe it or not, it's actually one that's not that hard to pronounce once you kind of get it in Bortenschlager, for those of you scoring at home. He's a transfer from Maryland, you know, Maryland being a Big Ten school. Still hard for me to fathom Maryland, the Big Ten. I think of them the ACC, but that's another conversation, another podcast. Started 9 games, played in 10 at Maryland. 2017 got the bulk of his experience, and he played fairly well. You know, I think the team went 3-6 in his starts, I believe. And also, he was helped by the fact that he had DJ Moore, of course, who was a first-round pick with the Carolina Panthers. So, you know, if you're grading Max's performance at Maryland, you do have to take into account that he had a future first-round pick that he was throwing the ball to, but looked fairly well, right? And after that, the thing that kind of hampered him was just injuries. Offensive coordinator changes, head coach changes, and he decides to drop down, or make the change, I should say, make the switch to FIU. He comes in, it's a COVID year. He's coming off an ankle injury, doesn't get a chance to rehab it, doesn't get an offseason program with the receivers, your coordinator, and he's kind of thrown to the wolves there. And you could say the same thing about all the quarterbacks. But to kind of finish my point on Max, I don't want to say, I mean, Max threw something like 30-something passes last year. I believe he went 18 of 36, if memory serves me correct. But you saw some evidence that Max Bortenschlager, the things that the coaching staff liked about him in terms of his smarts, his ability to make throws, you saw small bits of it. But in the here we'll pull up his numbers, are 22 of 48. So clearly, you know, not a huge sample size. But you saw enough to say, okay, let's kind of put this year behind us. We think with a full offseason in the program, we can at least, at bare minimum, get what we saw out of him at Maryland. And in my opinion, Devin, if you can get that from the quarterback position, the rest of it will take care of itself, because there are playmakers at tight end, at receiver, at running back, as we mentioned. So that's with Max. If you talk about, and again, this is going to be a quarterback competition, again, for your listeners who aren't familiar, there are 4 guys in this competition. It's going to be Max Bordenschlager. It's going to be Kalen Wiggins, who is very much a different quarterback. Kalen's a dual threat. He spent the majority of his career backing up James Morgan, who, of course, is a 4th-round pick with the New York Jets. The thing with Kalen, he's only attempted something like 59 passes in his career. So you don't have enough of a sample size to say this kid can't hack it at the FBS level as a quarterback. What you can say is that in the small sample size you have seen him, his development as a passer, you need to see further progress. That you can absolutely say. But to say whether or not, and there's been some talk amongst FIU fans, we've seen enough of Kalen, put him at receiver. I don't think that's fair. You can't judge a quarterback off of 50-something passes and say he can't get the job done. But his development does need to improve. But as a rusher, he holds the FIU program record for rushing yards in a game by a quarterback, 187 set against New Hampshire 2 years ago. So that kind of speaks to his ability with his legs. And then you got the wild cards here. You have redshirt freshman Hayden Carlson, who is really highly touted prospect, a 3-star prospect out of Tampa, Florida, son of former NFL quarterback Jeff Carlson. So he has all the physical tools. And Butch Davis said to us after spring signing day, the early signing period, that had FIU played a few more games, got into 8, 9, 10 games last year, Hayden Carlson would have started 2 or 3. There's 2 things you can glean from that statement. 1, how frustrated Butch Davis was with the quarterback play of the veterans, but 2, how well that they felt Hayden Carlson was progressing. So you have to keep an eye on him. He's a redshirt freshman. The big thing with him is he did miss some time in this year's spring due to COVID. So didn't necessarily get the full spring to kind of get in there and compete for the role. He'll have a chance to kind of pick things up in the fall. And the last name is Grayson James, another highly touted 3-star recruit. This one is a true freshman coming out of Texas. And, I know you're there in the Midwest, right?
Yes, sir.
You know Texas quarterbacks, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right. So if you're a Texas quarterback and you put up the numbers that he did, thrown for over 10,000 yards in his high school career, that means you're a pretty talented player. And he's a guy whose recruitment may have kind of been hampered by COVID as well. There's been some talk. I mean, he competed at the Elite 11 camps and things of that nature, and some talk that had not been a COVID year, he probably would have been a Power 5 prospect. So he gets it in the fall. He is currently on campus at FIU. Want to see what happens when fall camp opens. So as far as the quarterbacks go, I mean, I was kind of give you my quick assessment. I do believe that Max Bordenschlager will start the year as the starter. How much he's pushed by Hayden or Matt, how much he's pushed by Hayden or Kalen or Grayson, time will tell. But I do think, just considering the fact that you have all the pieces in place, you have some talented receivers, some talented tight ends that we can get into. I think going with the veteran, and if Max does have that full offseason under his belt, there's no reason to believe that he can't at least, he may not be James Morgan, but there's no reason to believe that he can't be an above average Conference USA quarterback.
Yeah. And, to be honest, like, I saw those names and kind of kept tabs on some of this from last year. A lot of the guys getting burned, all the guys getting some burn. Did not realize how jam-packed this quarterback room was, which is why I like to have folks like you on, because it's like, you know more so than I do. And it's very informative. And, I'm going through my handwritten notes and my preview and my information and stuff right now, and just kind of cross-referencing and just getting the nitty gritty, the N and G, is what I like to call it. With this recruit of Grayson James, like you said, Texas quarterback, that, and I frequently reference Phil Still's magazine. Everyone's got their own tools and everything, but I seem to use any one that I can get my hands on. And Phil Still was really high on this kid. Just to name a couple of random Texas quarterbacks, Drew Brees and Matt Stafford. Just throw those out there. You said something about these receivers, and you perked my interest there, because this Nate Jefferson kid, the redshirt freshman, stands 5'11", 170. He interests me a lot. But then you guys also got Bryce Singleton and Shamar Thornton, some upperclassmen. And then you alluded to, the tight end position having playmakers. Sterling Palmer, another upperclassman. Like you said, lots of pieces in place.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I'll start with the first name you mentioned, and Nate Jefferson. Nate's an intriguing guy because, first off, Nate Jefferson has elite track speed. I mean, he's a guy who's 4.4, 4.3 type of speed. And when he was recruited, again, another 3-star recruit out of the Orlando area there, he was kind of the heir apparent. He was tabbed by Butch Davis to be the heir apparent in the slot to former slot receiver Maurice Alexander, a guy who had a lot of success in former offensive coordinator Rich Skrosky's offense. So Nate has really played a fair amount, despite the fact that he is a redshirt freshman. Gotten 4 games. He got in 4 games and kept his redshirt in 2019. And then in 2020, really kind of looked for him to kind of break out a little bit. But again, everything with COVID and then, the quarterback situation. So his numbers may not necessarily reflect how much playing time he's gotten. And especially in the fact that FIU, when he came in, there were multiple other 3-star receivers coming with him. Guys like Chris Mitchell, who's still here. And is also a guy to keep a guy to keep an eye on. There we go. Xavier McGriff. I mean, there were a couple other 3-star recruits who came in, but Nate is a guy who you would think at bare minimum in the slot and in the return game, he'll make an impact. But the guys you really got to, in terms of the receiver position that you really got to look at, are going to be the starters. Shamar Thornton. Shamar had an excellent 2019 year. I mean, he's a guy who really emerged. In the early part of his career, he was fighting for playing time behind a lot of veteran receivers. I mentioned Maurice Alexander, Austin Maloney, CJ Wharton, Thomas Owens, was battling for playing time. And in 2019, he got his shot and really broke out, was the team's leading receiver. And that, again, was with a very deep receiving core, but, he really stood out. And in 2020, we're really looking for him to maybe take that next step and kind of break into the upper echelon of Conference USA receivers. And just kind of through a freak accident, he tears his hamstring before the season. He actually just posted a tweet that I believe it was yesterday. It was the 1-year anniversary of the day that he tore his hamstring. So you get an idea of how close we were to the start of fall camp before he tears his hamstring. So he misses all of last year. He's a guy to keep an eye on because I think if Shamar is fully healthy, he can be an upper echelon Conference USA receiver. Bryce Singleton is another guy who's battled injuries. I mean, Bryce has all the physical gifts that you're looking for in a receiver. A little small on the smaller side, 5'10", 5'11", $195, but plays well above his size. I mean, if you can go back and just Google Bryce Singleton catch Florida Atlantic, it's Odell Beckham-esque. It's a one-handed stab right there in the end zone for a TD 2019 year from, kind of a dime there from James Morgan. But he's battled injuries as well. But Bryce is a veteran. He's been with the program since 2017, was an all-freshman performer his first year. A name to keep an eye on is USF transfer Randall St. Felix, a guy who not really sure what happened his last 2 years at USF. Jeff Scott comes in, takes over Charlie Strong, new coaching staff. You know how that goes. But in his true freshman year, he was an all-freshman performer at the American level. So it'll be interesting to see. He's a Miami native, so maybe a return home, some familiar surroundings, that'll help him out. But listen, if FIU can get the most out of those 3 guys, and then the final name to keep an eye on is Tyrese Chambers, who was an FCS All-American at Sacred Heart. Butch Davis has raved about him. He's talked about the fact he's a football junkie. Whenever, Butch Davis is in his recruitment, asked him, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to catch some passes. What are you doing tomorrow? I'm going to run routes. So Tyrese has really made an impact. And again, when you talk about a veteran coach in Butch Davis, he is someone who I wouldn't say is effusive with his praise. He is not a guy who's going to just go out there and praise people unless it's really earned. And Tyrese has come in and seemingly, since the spring has really kind of earned his spot. So receiver, they're 4 or 5 deep of names I just mentioned there that if you get the best out of those guys, I've said this, been on the record, whether it's been on radio or other podcasts, I think FIU's receiver group has the highest potential ceiling of almost any receiver group in Conference USA, or really maybe UTEP having 2 guys there, and Jacob Cowing and Justin Garrett, 2 top end guys. Maybe they're a little bit, in terms of their ceiling might be a little bit higher, but FIU is right there. And I'll quickly touch on the tight ends. Sterling Palmer, you mentioned, a veteran, upperclassman. He's looking to rebound. The past few years have been, I don't want to say shaky, but again, with COVID, he didn't get the chance to fully develop last year. And then the year before, something that's interesting, Devin, is he had a standout freshman year. Was, again, all Conference USA, all freshman team. I believe was part of the all bowl team. Phil Steele might have been his all freshman team as well. I can't remember if it was that or Athlon Sports. Sorry, memory. I just can't pick it up right now offhand. But had a really good freshman year. But he was part of a tight end room that was all freshmen. he didn't have a veteran to learn from. And that's something that tight end coach Drew Davis has mentioned to me, that, really his development, he's had to learn on the fly. He didn't have a senior to learn from and show on the rope. So now entering what would be his quote unquote senior year, but still junior due to the NCAA rules, they feel that he's more developed, more well-rounded as a receiver and as a blocker. And I do look for big things from Sterling, but Rivaldo Fairweather as well. I mean, he just really broke out last year. Again, one of the few bright spots. The numbers aren't going to wow you, right? Because FIU only played 5 games. I believe it's 11 catches for $165. But when you look at just a guy, Devin, who, and this is a classic South Florida football story, a guy who has only played football for a handful of years, was a basketball player. You get a lot of raw talents down here in South Florida, guys who, for whatever reason, only played 1 year of high school football or 2 years of high school football. It's not like if you're in Ohio or Pennsylvania or Texas, you've been playing football since, your 5th grade or 4th grade. He was a hooper. And even in high school, they put him at defensive end, at safety, at tight end. Last year was his first full year as a tight end. And to have that kind of production is really exciting. A guy who's 6'5", 245 and still has a 40 and a 4.4s. At the Conference USA level, there aren't very many linebackers and safeties that can compete with that.
The athleticism that was, and I will say size, that what you guys seem to bring in this offseason was huge, because you'd mentioned that the more dynamic receivers in that core, a little more speedsters, a little less size to their frame. But you look at the size of the USF transfer, he's 6'2", over 200. And then that Sacred Heart transfer, I'm so glad that you brought Tyrese Chambers up, because that kid is spectacular. He is, right here, I got my notes if I can read correctly, 6'1", 195. So he's got a little more size to him also. And I'm really just excited to see the raw athleticism of the tight end group, the freshman that you just spoke of. And there are a lot of weapons, in this group here of pass catchers. And I just wanted to connect a couple of dots to Liberty from FIU here, because it was something that I remembered, but I didn't remember until I was doing some digging. But the former Georgia wideout, obvious connection with the SEC, Butch Davis, but J.J. Holloman, he was definitely, I remember him being a very high recruit coming out of he was like a 4-star, if I remember right. But he went on, he hit the portal again, which he would have been very interesting to see with the rest of the group of the guys, is what I was getting at. Didn't work for obvious reasons, of which you may know of, but he went on to Liberty. So that kind of little dot connection there is all I was trying to get at. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on some of the coaches, just kind of like that collection of coaches that have been brought around, Everett Withers, new defensive coordinator, had some run over at Ohio State. First-year special team coordinator in Casey Horney. He was an assistant at Texas for the last 4 years. I like this collection of coaching staff. Like I said, I think Butch Davis is starting to build some guys around him. And you look at those 17, 18, 19 results. You guys were there. It was 8-5, 9-4, 6-7. And look, I'm high on you guys. I really like the coaches.
Yeah, sure. You talk about Everett Withers, and that's, of course, Butch Davis's former defensive coordinator in North Carolina. So they have a longstanding relationship. And Everett Withers was actually tabbed to be the defensive coordinator after the retirement of Brent Guy following the 2018 season. But due to a last-minute conflict, Coach Withers received an offer from the New York Giants. And again, he and Butch Davis have a long-standing relationship. So it wasn't like Butch Davis was going to hold him up and prevent him from taking that opportunity. Fast forward 2 seasons later, now Everett Withers is the guy. And with a veteran defensive coordinator like Everett, you have to expect that there's at least going to be a progression in the defense, because while the secondary has performed really well, what's been the Achilles heel for this defense has been run defense. And the past 31 games, they've allowed over 160 yards rushing 18 times. 12 of those times they've gone over 180, and 9 of those times have gone over 200 yards. So with Everett Withers' arrival, expect some improvements with the defense, the coaching staff. The players have really raved about the new defensive coaching staff. They've said things that, for example, that the defense is more simple. And listen, I am not qualified to say whether or not the defense was complex, but when you talk from some of the veterans like Richard and Rashard Dames, Daniel Jackson, and others, they say that the defense is more simplistic and will allow them just to kind of read and react and make plays. You talk about Casey Horney, who had spent 9 years at Baylor under Art Briles, and then from there spent 4 years at Texas. So, he's been with some big time programs as well. And we'll have to see what happens as far as him being with special teams. So far, Butch Davis is another guy that he's really raved about as far as what he's wanted to do with the special teams. A lot of new coaches overall. When you look at last year's staff, the only holdovers are Joel Rodriguez. Sean Binks was a GA last year, is now taking over as the running backs coach, but Joel Rodriguez at the offensive line. And of course, Butch Davis' son, Drew, as a tight ends coach. And last but not least, Bryn Renner was the cornerbacks coach last year, switches over to the quarterbacks. So those are your holdovers, but a new offensive coordinator, Andrew Briner. For those of you who may not be familiar, Andrew Briner is from the Joe Moorhead coaching tree. Of course, Joe Moorhead, one of the early innovators of the RPO offense. So do expect to see some of those principles. Butch Davis has noted when he talked about the decision to go away from former offensive coordinator Rich Skrosky and to Andrew Briner, he noted for the need for the offense to evolve. And when you kind of get into that a little bit, it's again, I am not going to speak for Butch Davis, but what he's kind of hinted at is that with the multiple tight ends and multiple running backs that they've recruited, he kind of wanted to get out of being in 11 personnel all the time, or, wanted more personnel groupings that were going to allow for multiple tight ends, multiple backs to be on the field and utilized at once, and can kind of show defenses a different look. And again, when you look at the athletes they've recruited, you can understand why he may want to take that approach. So really, I don't want to say an entire new coaching staff, but if you go down the list, again, Bryn Renner was with the cornerbacks, now with the cornerbacks. So new quarterbacks coach, new running backs coach, new receivers coach. Andrew Briner is coaching the receivers as well as the offensive coordinator. Tight end offensive line stays the same. New defensive line coach in Deke Adams, who comes over from Ole Miss. New linebackers coach is Randall McCray, who came from the Arizona Cardinals. New cornerbacks coach in Brandon Harris, who was last year a GA at Florida State. Everett Withers is handling the safeties and the defensive coordinator. Of course, new defensive coordinator as well. And new special teams coach in Casey Horney. So overall, an entire new staff.
Yeah, but I believe a lot of good improvements to be had here with philosophies and such. You alluded to the getting out of the 11 personnel stuff, showing some different things. Just look at what Briner did with the run game at Fordham. I believe he had Chase Edmonds there. Yeah, so I mean, lots of different wrinkles. Sure, they could get downhill. Look at Chase Edmonds' running style, but he's also an elusive pass catching. Let me try to talk here, Eric. Back and so again, another wrinkle that could definitely be unraveled in y'all's offense this year. Well, I was looking at the Vegas win totals because that's what one does when they're a betting degenerate like myself. And 4.5 is set for the win total right now. I'm looking at vegasinsider.com. My bookie, our show sponsor, is starting to upload more and more teams' win totals now that, spring practices, all that good stuff, publications are out, media days. I was hoping, if you've got the time, Eric, I was hoping we could maybe breeze through this schedule and see what we think. Because right now, like I said, I'm high on you guys, but there is a tough conference schedule that you guys got to go through at the back end. And I want to get your honest opinion, and I want to see which way you think I should go, since you know this team better than anyone I've spoken to. So,
that's not a problem. We can go through the schedule. I will give this disclaimer. This information is for entertainment purposes only. So I just want to go ahead and clarify that. Yes. But go ahead, man. We can run it down. Absolutely.
Yeah. Off the record, we will not hold you to the coals. Listeners will not send you hate mail. I promise. Long Island, Texas State was looking at Texas State and Texas Tech, and it came out Texas Tech. That's interesting. Long Island, Texas State for the first 2 games. Win-win is my opinion.
Well, okay. Here's the deal. FIU has not won a game since they beat Miami in 2019, right? I used to know the number of days off the top of my head. Unfortunately, for Panthers fans, it's kind of extended far enough to where I don't know that number, but let's just say it's been a while. They have to beat Long Island. Yeah. If they don't, listen, I'm not a believer in, and I say this as a media person, in the make or break or must win. I think we overuse those cliches in media. However, just for this team's confidence, they need to win. And this is something I plan on asking Butch Davis. If he feels that locker room, just for their own confidence, they just need to not be in the losing locker room. So Long Island, I will say, is a win. Texas State is interesting, Devin, because you look at that program and they're in a similar position like FIU.
Sure.
Jake Spavital is entering his third year. He took over for Everett Withers, ironically. He was the Texas State head coach. So Jake Spavital is looking to rebuild that program. When you look at Texas State last year, they played some teams tough. They while they went 2-10, I want to say they had a handful of games, maybe 3 or 4 games that were decided by 7 points or less or 10 points or less. So that's crucial because guess what? Texas State's looking to come in and the reason I mentioned Jake Spavital being in his third year, 2-10 last year. I think he was 1-11 or maybe 2-10 his first year. So he's just as desperate to come out and get his season going with early wins. So that's one that while I am picking FIU, don't think that that's just going to be a pushover game by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, absolutely. Plenty of offense on that team, still working through some defensive issues, specifically run defense. And I think that Devonta Price will be able to have some success in that game, but it should offer fireworks. Absolutely. Definitely not a quote unquote lock. Texas Tech, Big 12 folk down Big 12. Well, it's still technically the Big 12, so I'm rolling with it.
But by the time we finish recording this, it might not.
It may not be. Yeah. They did get the show transfer in from Oregon. So Texas Tech, I mean, this is going to be a tough one. I hate to be the Big 12 guy to say that FIU is going to lose, and hopefully I can get you back on the show after saying that. But Texas Tech, I think, is just going to be a little bit too much, and just kind of talent pool disparity, just David versus Goliath narrative, if you will. I mean, I hate to use it, but I think it's just going to be a little too much.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first off, win, lose, or draw, I'm available. So you don't have to worry whether or not the Panthers lose or getting me on the show. No, I agree with you. I do think that it'll be interesting because, again, FIU, when you look at their just sheer talent perspective, I wouldn't say the talent, quote unquote, is David versus Goliath because the Panthers have had one of the top recruiting classes in Conference USA since Butch Davis has arrived. All of his recruiting classes have been top 4. But I think in terms of actual production and just, where each program is at, in that sense, I would lean more towards Tech.
Absolutely. Butch Davis definitely closing the gap on the Power 5 schools with his talent, doing a great job at it. Central Michigan, this is a true coin flip. And for me, a Conference USA and a MAC game, September 25th, I don't know what day of the week that is. I think it's probably a Saturday. But sign me up for it. I love the MAC. I love the Conference USA. And get some cross-platform action here.
Yeah. So, I mean, are you picking a winner in that game, or am I you want me to kind of give you my thoughts? I don't know if I can yet. I'm going to be that guy. I'll tell you what. I lean FIU, but Central Michigan, I think they can be a sleeper in the MAC this year. And further down the road in the schedule or in the season, I think that this win would look really, really well or really good, whatever the proper grammar use would be. Would look really good for Florida International because I think Central Michigan is going to be a bit better than what people are thinking this year. Yeah. So right now, I am very much split on that game because you look at Central Michigan, they're in a similar position as not necessarily Texas State because Jim McElwain there, they've had more success than Texas State has, but that's a very good G5 program. And FIU has to go to the road to Mount Pleasant. September, that weather could be a little chilly. You don't know. So that's going to be a toss-up, in my opinion. I wouldn't pick that one just yet, but I'd say that's going to be a toss-up. I will say this. I'll quickly as we're going on the schedule, this has kind of been my talking point, Devin, as far as FIU and like their overall success for 2021. I think that 4-game stretch is crucial because if you come out 3-1, then you're in really good position once you enter CUSA play. If you come out 2-2, it's still 50-50 because of the next game on the schedule at FAU, a team you haven't beaten since 2016. If you come out 1-3, then things have the potential to go off the rails. Again, you go to FAU versus Charlotte versus Western Kentucky at Marshall. All of those games are very much toss-ups. I mean, FAU, again, you probably would lean more FAU right now. At Marshall, you would lean more Marshall. The Charlotte and Western Kentucky games are toss-ups. But so let's say if you come out 1-3 and then you go best case scenario 2-2 there, you're now, 3-5? You're really, really putting a lot of pressure. I mean, just do the quick math here. You got to go at least 3 out of the last 4 there to qualify for a bowl.
Yeah. And, Butch, like I said, before the weird 2020 year, he had y'all bowling 3 years in a row. I feel strongly that they get to a bowl game this year, albeit with this, you talk about the tough start to the conference play. A lot of those coin flips. I think Marshall's going to be down this year. I think replacing Doc Holliday was a mistake, even though Marshall's returning so much of that successful offensive line in regards to like line yards and all that. But yes, that is a game that Butch Davis is going to have his guys prepared for, and they're going to get every bit of the Panthers that they're going to want. Talking about the Thundering Herd there. Western Kentucky, like all 4 of these games, definitely toss-ups for me. But like you said, I would lean with you getting that significant road win. And now they got to go on the road 3 games in a row, going Texas Tech, Central Michigan, FAU. But, thankfully for Florida International, Florida Atlantic is in Florida. So a little less travel there, get a little more prep and recovery time at home. Charlotte, I think that they definitely can get them 100%. Charlotte's a little bit middling, in my opinion. Really looking forward to what they do this year in conference. But again, I really just like what Butch Davis is doing here with your guys' team. And then, of course, getting Old Dominion at home in between Marshall and Middle Tennessee is huge. Got to probably assume and chalk that up for a win. Old Dominion a little behind. Didn't have a season at all last year, if I remember right.
Yeah. With ODU, they chose to opt out last year. So
yeah.
You are correct.
Yeah. Middle Tennessee, they've got a lot of stuff to figure out. So I think that FIU wins that one. And then the last 2, these are some pretty tough games here. Sith Latrell and North Texas, and then Frank Gore Jr. over at Southern Miss. These 2 teams here, very interesting in my opinion. I think Southern Miss has more success in the conference this year than what folks are thinking. I think North Texas actually is more of a middling club. I think they take a half step back. I could definitely see FIU finishing their last 4 games 3-1. Definitely the 2 against Old Dominion and Middle Tennessee. I think they'll probably split the North Texas Southern Miss games to end the season. But ultimately, I personally feel that over 4.5 is a good look, even though they're facing some tough conference opponents. But they've had some success against these opponents in most recent years, pre-COVID and such.
Yeah, well, I will say this. I will caution you in terms of Middle Tennessee. They, of course, lost the last 2 years against Middle Tennessee. And then the 2018 game, that game came down to a last-second interception, Olin Cushion picking off Asher O'Hara, who came in relief of Brent Stockstill there. I remember that game because it was one of the most exciting games really in the history of FIU Stadium, no longer Ricardo Silva Stadium. But again, Middle Tennessee's had the Panthers number, so you definitely want to caution against that one. Old Dominion, I can understand what you're saying. They are very much rebuilding and did not play last year. North Texas and Southern Miss are interesting. When I look at Seth Latrell, their biggest thing is they haven't been able to keep points off of the scoreboard. They're under 3rd defensive coordinator in as many years. They are turning to Phil Bennett to turn around that defense that allowed almost 39 points per game last year. Offensively, they haven't had an issue. I mean, the run game's very strong. They had 3 rushers over 500 yards last year, and they'll be led by Oscar Adaway III and DeAndre Torrey. Of course, Trey Siggers took his talents to SMU. So we'll see what happens with North Texas. That's a game that, they do come to Miami. Southern Miss, final one at home. I am a little more optimistic like you on Southern Miss than maybe some people are, because when you look at their schedule last year, first off, they had 3 head coaches, just a level of tumultuousness there with the head coach position. And then you include opt-outs and things of that nature. Of course, going through the COVID year, their quarterback opted out midway through the year. And yet 3 of their losses were by 7 points or less. 2 of them were by a field goal or less. So again, Southern Miss, that's a team led by Frank Gore Jr. West Virginia transfer Trey Lowe, his first full offseason as a football player, because of course he played baseball the past few years. So that could be interesting as well. But I guess if I had to pick those 4 games, I would lean more towards ODU as a win. I genuinely think all 3 are toss-ups. Maybe the one that I feel most confident about would be the Southern Miss game. But those other 2, I mean, Floyd Stadium's been a house of horrors for the Panthers for the past few trips there. So that one always gets dicey, and North Texas is a really high-powered offense. So we'll see.
Yeah. Lots of things to keep an eye out on throughout the course of this schedule for sure. Lots of development to be had, and a lot of opportunities for these players and coaches to really gel. So really looking forward to it. And I had one last question for you, and then I promise I'll let you off the hook, Eric.
What's up, my man?
Out of the most recent, you said you've been covering FIU for what, 5 years now is what you said?
Entering my 5th season. Yeah. So 4 years, 5 seasons.
Yeah. So going into your 5th season, and you've referenced a couple of amazing FIU games in the past here recently. If you had one that was more unforgettable, that you think is more just ingrained in your brain, maybe a piece you wrote about or a game that you were at, what's the favorite game of yours that you've had to, or not had to cover, that makes it sound bad, but that you have covered for the Panthers so far in this career of yours?
It's hard to choose one, so I will give you 3. I mean, of course, you got to start with the Miami game, right?
Yes.
That was such a and listen, I'm objective. I don't have a rooting interest one way or the other. But when you consider the way that season had played out, all of the expectations that went into the 2019 season overall was disappointing to finish the year at 6-7 for that program, for that team. But they had James Morgan, they had Stanley Thomas Oliver, they had T.R. Tart. These are all guys who either drafted or played in the NFL last year. And yet the team really underachieved, especially starting the year 0-2. So just the way that season had played out, no one was counting the Panthers, give them a chance to win that game. And Devin, I'll give you this. One of the more surreal things that I think I've ever been a part of as a journalist is FIU was the home team, right? That game was played at Marlins Park, the home of the MLB's Miami Marlins. FIU was the quote unquote home team. And of course you're thinking, all right, everyone knows it's the Hurricanes. They're the quote unquote top draw in South Florida. But I was at least expecting that it would be, I don't know, 50-50 maybe as far as crowd reaction in terms of when the teams were introduced.
Sure.
And you got to remember, for your listeners who may not know this, Marlins Park is on the old grounds of the former Orange Bowl, of course, the legendary home of the Hurricanes.
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't.
Yeah, it was on the exact grounds. And it was 95-5, Devin. I mean, it was loud cheers. It looked as if it was a Miami home game. And Miami took the field first. When FIU took the field, it was resounding boos. And I remember tweeting that out. I maybe, for some fun, maybe I'll find that tweet and DM it to you after this. It sounded like they were on the road at Alabama. And the fact that they countered all of that, all of the circumstances, and still won that game. Again, I don't have a rooting interest, but I couldn't help but be happy for the guys in that locker room. So many of them are Miami natives to come out in their home city and get booed, to get a chance to have the last laugh there. So that's one. I'd say the second was that Middle Tennessee State game, only because that was really the game that allowed them it put them in first place in Conference USA East and really buoyed them to a 9-win year. Again, came down to really the last 30 seconds of the game. 28-25 final score. Asher O'Hara throws a pass that would have won the game. Olin Cushion, a 5'8" safety, jumps in front of it at the end, picks it off. I mean, I've never heard that stadium as loud as I heard it that day. And then probably a third. If I were to pick a third, I would say, unfortunately, there have been games that were either blowouts or not particularly really interesting games per se. But if I were to give a third, I would probably say, I mean, this one's going to be a FIU loss, one that was back and forth, but I'd probably have to go with the not the Cure Bowl. I covered that game last year. That was Liberty and Coastal Carolina. The Camellia Bowl, 2020 Camellia Bowl from the 2019 year. That game was played in Montgomery, Alabama. And that was one that the Panthers, again, we want to talk about this, a contrast of two styles. Arkansas State, led by at the time Blake Anderson, high-powered offense, going to throw the ball 30, 40, 50 times a game. FIU, great pass defense. And that one was back and forth, came down to the last few possessions. And of course, Arkansas State got the win at the end. But that was a really, entertaining game to cover as well.
I could only imagine how exciting all three of those games were going to be. I'm looking past the last 4 years of games here for FIU, and on that third one, I was sitting here trying to figure out which one you were going to go with. I was a little off. I thought you were going to go with the Marshall overtime loss in 2019 in the season, because I remember that game, and that was a bit crazy. But yes, all three of those games, great, phenomenal selections. Got to throw a bowl game in there. That Arkansas State game, I remember when the bowl games were released for that year. I remember looking at that one saying what you just said. Wow, those are conflicting styles. Like that's going to be an interesting matchup. And then look what happened. It was back and forth. It was exciting. Unfortunately, FIU got the loss, but nonetheless, exciting, like you said. Side note here, Eric, FIU's only lost by a combined 6 points the last 2 times they've played Marshall. So I think they get their number this year. So just throwing that out there. Man. Well, Eric, this was fun, boss. I did not expect that I was going to be able to have such amazing insight on Florida International going into my prep and college football work going into this season. So again, I've got to thank you a million times over. And please, 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 for the listener's sake, other than, Underdog Dynasty, SB Nation, is there any other stuff that you would like to plug or just, again, talk about yourself? And I'm putting you in an awkward position again, because you talked about, you're used to like hosting and like you don't talk about yourself, but anything else about you that you want the Hoop Ballers to know about?
No, nothing about myself personally, but about my work.
Your work. Yeah.
No big deal, man. I can say this, first off, appreciate you having me on. Not a problem. I always enjoy getting a chance to do these preseason interviews. So, always have the time and you know how to find me. But for those of you who don't know how to find me, you can find me on Twitter at @EricCHenry_ for FIU coverage. And of course, Conference USA as a whole, Conference USA coverage as well. UnderdogDynasty.com, Underdog Dynasty at Twitter for all of our Group of 5 football coverage. And if you want to take a listen to the Shula Bowl, we talk FAU, FIU, hijinks, sometimes greater Conference USA stuff. You can find us at Shula Bowl Pod on Twitter, 5 Reasons Sports, home for South Florida sports news. That's pretty much outside of it. I mean, I won't plug my my South Florida radio appearances. Okay, I guess I'll say this. If you are interested, typically during the year, do a weekly South Florida radio appearance on 560. You can find it on Mondays and Tuesdays. It's the South Florida High School Sports Show, but we get into both South Florida High School sports and FAU and FIU as well. So you can find that on 560.
Perfect. I'm always looking for more of your content, so I'm glad you decided to share the radio stuff. I'm a big proponent of AM, FM radio. I just love old school radio. Like I want to own an AM radio station one day, so I still love supporting it. Again, Hoop Ballers. That was Eric Henry, I should say, beat writer for the Florida International Panthers. I couldn't have had more fun in any way imaginable talking about FIU in this beautiful Saturday. Going to be talking about them on a lot of different Saturdays here soon, and that's just wonderful, beautiful news. So, Hoop Ballers, you know how it goes. I'm always sending you all of my good vibes and all of my good energies. I hope you have a safe, wonderful day out there today. Do something kind for someone if you can. And Today in Sports Betting is out.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.
Want to look 10 years younger? We recommend Short North Dental for your whitening and brightening needs because nothing is sexier than a man with a great smile. Check out the newest gallery in the Arts District at shortnorthdental.com because dentistry has never looked this good.
Have you been to Express lately? People can't get enough of their clothes. They're like instant confidence boosters. The jeans come in a temp control fabric that keeps you comfortable no matter the weather. And the t-shirts, hands down, they'll feel like they're made of the softest fabric you've ever worn. And get this, the suits have stretch and look sharp. Like, what? How do they do that? Everyone's raving about the newest looks from Express. Just check out the 5-star reviews. See for yourself and shop the latest at express.com and in stores.